Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the ISIS Malaysia webinar titled Artificial Intelligence and the Future of Cybersecurity. To our participants, thank you very much for taking your time to join us, particularly if you're in Malaysia. It's probably quite a rainy morning today. The topic of artificial intelligence, I suppose, is one timely and significant. Timely because post-pandemic recovery and national development programs would hinge on the digital economy and adoption of such enabling technologies, especially with the launch of policies like My Digital Economy Blueprint that highlights artificial intelligence as a component of the fourth industrial revolution. Secondly, the technology is significant for the transformative role it would play, from delivering efficient services through data analytics and machine learning to improving efficiencies in tackling cyber threats. The role of trained computing power performing tasks will penetrate in various technologies in the future, and it will actually change the way we would actually do things, even to a certain extent, decision making, when we actually should when we do look at things like artificial intelligence. Therefore, artificial intelligence and its impact on cybersecurity can be viewed in two ways. The first is a tool to assist in seeking solutions for cybersecurity. Therefore, conversations can be held with bottlenecks or issues for the adoption of these technologies, whether it is for business, critical sectors of the government. The second are the cybersecurity issues that can occur with the adoption of such technologies. These will cut across issues of algorithm bias, concerns of privacy and data collection, as well as various issues on ethics. We are most grateful to have with us today Dr. Robert Hercock, Chief Research Scientist at BT, Britain's multinational telecommunications company, and the wealth of experiences and insights Dr. Hercock will offer in the next hour or so. Dr. Hercock has over 20 years experience in leading security research projects in the UK and was team leader for cybersecurity in the UK Ministry of Defence Information Fusion Defence Technology Centre. We do look forward to the world Dr. Hercock will paint in regards to AI and cybersecurity. But before going forth, I wish the participants to share your questions in the Q&A function, which will be attended to at the end of the session. I would like to mention that the Q&A function is preferred, and we may miss questions if it is actually conveyed through other methods. Without further ado, I wish to welcome Dr. Hercock to take the floor. Dr. Hercock, the floor is yours.
Right, thank you very much, Farlina. Good morning, everybody. If you go to the slide deck, so people can see that rather than just me.
Okay. Okay, whoops, I'm so sorry.
Right, so thank you very much for this invitation to ISIS. Pleasure to be here. I'm currently in Malaysia and Kuala Lumpur on a sort of business trip. Today you've asked me to talk about artificial intelligence and the future of cybersecurity. These are both complex topics, and they have a long historical interconnection, often in ways that people are not aware of. And I like to draw out this historical background and then talk a little bit about how cybersecurity in particular is a complex adaptive system. So I'm not going to focus on the technology so much, but about the processes and principles that direct cybersecurity, and then how we can apply artificial intelligence to both defend and also consider how it might be a threat to the cyber domain. Give the first slide, please, Farlina. So see, these are some of the questions I was asked to address. So what are the cyber challenges? Obviously, AI is impacting and shifting the cyber domain. How do you acquire these emerging technologies? What are the risks associated with them? What are the concerns that you might have as a country and a commercial organization over dependencies, especially those technologies are foreign technologies? How is AI a net gain or loss? You know, is it going to help or hinder the cyber security problem? What are the safeguards, the rules, the principles you might need in the adoption of these kind of technologies? And then we'll sort of end with a dialogue really focused around Malaysia's requirements. So specifically for countries like Malaysia, what aspects of AI should you be adopting? What offerings and services could you create or develop in this space? Next slide, Farlina. A copy of the slides will be available afterwards, hopefully. And in the notes section on this, there's a reference to a new report by the separate company Netscout, a very useful threat intelligence report they've just produced. And this is just a snapshot from that report where you can see from 2020 to 21, there's a year-on-year, month-to-month growth of the whole spectrum of cyber attacks. This is particularly DDoS attacks. The cyber problem does not go away, and I'll come on to why that's the case later. It's interesting when you talk to people who are not technologists in the domain, they obsess about the technology. And then there's always an assumption that this is an engineering problem. You can just tweak your engineering, tweak your systems, and everything's secure. And cybersecurity is not like that. It's not that kind of problem. Next slide, please, Farlina. So I'm going to focus on this point. Why is it hard? Why is it so hard? In the references, you'll see I produced a paper in Washington in 2012, which tried to address this question and tries to explain why cybersecurity, as it's evolved from the 1990s to the 2000s, has become such a challenging global problem, an endemic problem that just resists the technologies that we throw at it. Right, I hope you've held out a coffee because it's going to get deep and complex now. So please have some caffeine. So one of the problems is replication. It's something we don't think about consciously, but most malicious software can replicate. It can copy itself. So from one computer, it jumps to another and spreads and spreads, spreads like COVID, like a biological virus, mathematically very similar. And to understand why that's the case, you have to go back in time to the 1940s. So the founders of computing, Alan Turing, John von Neumann, two giants of the start of the computer age, they had a side interest. They didn't just create artificial intelligence as a concept and the whole computer concept. They were also deeply interested in how could computer systems host replicating code. Could code like life copy itself in such systems? They produced many sort of philosophical essays and concepts about this idea. So right at the beginning of computing, the idea that software might be able to copy itself was deeply connected. It wasn't until the 1980s, 1988, that process began to happen. Something called the Morris worm started in a few universities in America, where the code was designed to copy itself, started spreading, created a security threat. So over the past 60 years, there is this deep connection between cybersecurity and artificial intelligence and the code that has lifelike or intelligent behavior. Also, if you go back to the late 1980s, early 1990s, cyber attacks was a game initially. It was a fun activity that usually teenagers or young men would engage in to prove they were clever and prove they could break into the university, maybe change their marks in the university system. Since the early 2000s, it's now become a major business process. Security is not an individual process. It's both state-driven and commercially driven by malicious groups. So why is it so challenging? It's about people, psychology, economics, and the technology. This is the fundamental issue. The technology is one aspect, is one dimension, and the technology is continuously evolving. Every year there's a new technology, a new challenge in the technology domain. But the security problem is fundamentally about the economics. Where is the money? Where is the value in the system and the network? Often people don't think about the value, especially in the question of data protection. Whose data are we talking about, and what value is there in that data? Psychology. So I did some psychology when I was studying my early life. It's about behavior. And you can go back in time thousands of years to ancient Egypt and read hieroglyphic tablets that are about street crime in Egypt and how that's a challenge and people asking the police and the pharaoh to do something about it. Malicious human behavior is not new. And I'm afraid I suspect it will be with us for some time to come. So the internet and computers are just another expression of how human beings can be malicious towards others. In the next slide, please. Right. I said this last week, I'll say it again. Please have 2 coffees because you need to concentrate here. So this is not just about computers. It's not just the internet and IP packets. Something I've tried to push into the cyber community for a long time is to have the right perspective. And what I think is the right perspective is to see the whole thing as a complex adaptive system. What do I mean by that? So I'll give some examples. I'll explain the definition of this. And then I'll try and explain why this is the right philosophical approach, the right conceptual approach to cybersecurity. So first of all, I think cybersecurity is best described as a complex adaptive system. What do we mean by that? Such a system has deeply unpredictable behavior. The whole art of prediction is challenging in such a system. Key point, small perturbations can lead to major effects. It's nonlinear. There are nonlinear relationships across such a system. Equally, it's very hard to map out all the dependencies. In particular, in large-scale cyber networks, it's always a challenge to identify what are the key assets, what are the actual critical assets in such a system. And the architecture you started out with 5 years ago, 3 years ago, is not the actual architecture of the enterprise system you have today. These systems, you're even within a medium-scale company, the architecture and the network evolves continuously. And it's mathematically challenging, of course. Next slide, please, Farlina. So this is a very crude definition of complex adaptive systems, but it's important to understand where we're going to. You have explicit nonlinear feedback loop, explicit nonlinear relationships. There are many feedback loops. So in this case, it's the feedback loops between the people, machine to machine, the organizations to the people. It's the human factors policies. It's the employment policies you have between employees and a company. Often you get an insider attack where a particular employee feels aggrieved against the company and they do something malicious inside the company's network. That's a real problem. If that person has any kind of IT skill, they can cause chaos. They can badly damage a company. And that's about the human relationship that exists between that employee and the employer. Opaque boundaries. This is a fascinating area. So if you go back to the late 1990s, early 2000s, in cybersecurity, there was this deep belief that we could have like a medieval castle. We just put a big castle wall around our network. If we have a good enough firewall and you maintain the firewall and you sweep your network continuously, you can have a secure system. And that worked kind of okay for a while. But now we've moved literally like the medieval period into a post-canon period where your castle walls no longer work. You have a completely open boundary between the outside external networks and internal networks. So it's about how you protect your key assets, how you identify those key assets, how you protect them, how you de-risk your business processes. Similar is the presence of memory. So these complex adaptive systems have this complex hysteresis, to use a physics term. So the way they move through these feedback loops is complicated in itself. They're often also multi-scale. So there's a fractal hierarchy across such networks. So you can imagine in this case, are we talking about an IoT network at a micro scale, an intranet, or the internet itself, or the autonomous system structures between major network systems? There's a complex scaling factor that takes place. Next slide, please, Farlina. We have lots of time for questions at the end, so we can go back to any point in the slides and address anything that I haven't covered in enough depth. I have a couple more slides on the complex adaptive systems piece, because I think it's so important, and it's my choice, so I can do what slides I like. Right, so more specific examples of complex adaptive systems. Human societies, obviously. So financial systems, the picture on the right-hand side is an image from the 1929 Wall Street crash, where there was panic, confusion. And that was a textbook example of a feedback loop, an interaction between business processes, a business economic cycle, human behavior, certain banks that were involved, and a major event took place that was world-changing. Weather systems, ecosystems, obviously social insects, things like ants, bees, good examples, geophysical systems, and of course cyber networks, which is the argument I'm putting in this presentation. Next slide, please. Right, now to try and ground it down a little bit and also try and connect it to the cyber domain. One way of thinking about it in the cyber domain is to think of predator-prey cycles. Think of the malicious actors as predators, everyone else as the prey. What's the feedback loop between the malicious behavior and the people trying to defend your networks? So you just click a little sequence of images. So 1995 in American Yellowstone National Park, there was a problem, too many deer. There was no predators, lots of deer, and the deer were destroying half the ecosystem in the park. So in 95, the US government said, okay, let's put one of the apex predators back into the park. They released a packet, 3 packs of wolves, they imported from Canada. See what happens. So you'd assume there'd be just a simple interaction between the wolves and the deer, there'd be less deer, more wolves. And that didn't happen if you click to the next couple of images. So sure enough, the wolves controlled the population of deer, so there were lots more wolves, less deer. But other loops started to occur. So the fact there was less deer meant there were more trees because the deer were eating all the tree saplings. More trees meant the beavers could build dams in the rivers. More beaver dams meant more fish. More fish meant more bears. If you click one more click, you get a nice bear picture. The entire ecology of the park changed. Vastly more species were able to thrive. Yes, you had depleted one species. There were lots of them anyway. But then many of the original species came back and started to thrive. So this is an example of the feedback loops that take place. So in the cyber context, think about how if you suppress one part of a malicious cyber process, it's likely to spread elsewhere. So the bad guys will shift their attack vector. So you have to think about the entire system, the entire ecosystem. If you focus on a particular activity, what is it going to displace? What will be displaced? What will be the side effects of that activity? Next slide, please. Right. We're going to leave the complex data systems world and move on a little bit to actual technologies. Then I'll go down to the artificial intelligence piece. And then we'll kind of come back to themes like resilience and complexity again. Emerging technology, IoT, Internet of Things. So, as you're aware, Internet of Things is all about embedded sensors, tracking devices, RFID tags. It's a vast array of different technologies. It's many different families of technologies. And it brings with it multiple cyber challenges. The IoT layer itself is hard to manage. The memory and CPU power in the device is very limited, almost non-existent sometimes. How do you get advanced cyber defense software into such a limited hardware footprint? Physical security, by definition, IoT devices out there. You have millions of devices scattered through the public domain. Anyone can access them. It's not like a bank where you have a hardened server inside a closed room. This is a good example. I put this stake in because it's a good example of the economics of the problem. Who's going to pay for the security of the IoT device? Often for the OEMs, the original suppliers, there isn't the cost, there isn't the economic value, the bandwidth in the cost of the device to include complex security. If the device was a 5-cent device or 10-cent device that they've stuck on an RFID tag, there's no margin for security in there. So then we go back to behavior and psychology. Who's going to incentivize the OEM to do that extra step? Who's going to provide the extra services to make that extra security? So this goes down to state regulation, state control. Who's responsible for this ever-spreading wave of IoT that's taking place? I don't have easy answers to that, but it's something you need to think about at the policy level, certainly. Next slide, please, Farlina. This is public domain information in the current European conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Links there. IoT can matter. In this case, a state is not, the soldiers of a particular state have not realized that their Fitbits, their smartphones, their smart earbuds are all giving out IP data and location data. And so the Ukrainians have used that to map out the location of the Russian forces in Ukraine. Obviously, this works both ways. So IoT and your geophysical security of IP-enabled devices can really matter and have major implications. So it's a critical topic for any state to consider. Next slide, please. Okay. A very topical issue at the moment is the value of cyber currencies, cryptocurrencies. So this began with Bitcoin around 2010. Blockchain, I like blockchain as a technology. It's a good general purpose technology. Distributed ledgers are a fascinating concept in computing and database technologies, give you great ways of doing authentication, distributed trust management, and crypto. However, of course, cryptocurrencies are a primary payment channel for ransomware, malicious activity online. So most of the ransomwares, they ask for payment in Bitcoin. And this is giving a bad name to what is a neutral technology, really. This has great applications in things like IoT, supply chain management, all kinds of valuable applications. So do be careful about, if you're planning, states are planning regulation around the whole blockchain piece and cryptocurrencies, do it in a carefully considered, fine-grained manner. This is going to be an emerging domain. There'll be continuous cycles through all the different cryptocurrencies and how they impact cybersecurity. Next slide, please, Farlina. Conscious of time. Apologies for any background noise. I'm in this hotel room at the moment. Graph-based methods. Right, now this is a fascinating area that's an emerging field in cybersecurity at the moment. So since 2010, there's been an explosion of the idea of using graph visualization, graph databases. So if you look online, there's a company called Neo4j, which is one of the major graph database companies. And you can see examples there, and also this company, Cambridge Intelligence, of how they use graph technology in this way. When I say graph, I should explain. I'm not talking about your school XY coordinate graph concept. We're talking about graphs as an abstract node edge connection graph, where you think about a social graph or a transport graph or a computer network as a graph, where you've got each computer as a node and the network is the edge. So we're talking about it in a very abstract way, but it's becoming obvious that it's quite useful if you map out your cyber network and then all the overlaid networks, the IoT and the human networks on top of it as a graph. You can start to apply very powerful mathematical tools, new algorithms, graphing algorithms that are emerging to understand the complexity in the cyber events. I'll get the next slide for you. We'll start to give examples of that. So one of the tools we built in my team, so I'm a research team in BT, is called Nexus. And a Nexus is this a graph modeling capability. And the example you're seeing here is a botnet system that's being analyzed. And it just gives your cyber analysts the ability to explore the data at a much higher level. So they don't have to be looking at the low-level packet data or even the outputs from different cyber tools you might have employed. And we use a lot of different cyber tools. But they can start to see the actual flows of events, flows of behavior across that graph. They can drill down into each node and explore the underlying IP information or the underlying server information, but they can get a very high level view. And also, this is where AI starts to come in. The color coding of that graph and the interaction between those has been explored using machine learning algorithms. So to do the classification, the clustering, the analysis. So we're trying to use AI to augment the human capability. This is the key, what we think is absolutely key. It's the interplay. The AI is not yet sophisticated enough to do the contextual analysis of what's taking place, but it is good enough to do a lot of the filtering, classification of the raw data to help the analyst say, well, actually, last Tuesday at 4 a.m., there was an interesting set of events that seemed to be correlated. Now, human beings are really bad at doing that long-term analysis of events or packets over a long time period, especially when some of the bad guys try to hide them. And it's quite hard to see those low-level activities, but a machine is very good at that. Next slide, please, Farlina. Hopefully this should be an animated slide. We'll see, yes, no. Okay, if you click on the slide, Farlina, okay, go back one. All right, anyway, if you grab me separately, show the animated version. But the idea is that the Nexus tool is a generic graph analytical tool base. So in this case, we're actually looking at Bitcoin payments. So a few years ago, there was a ransomware attack called WannaCry. In that case, in the UK, lots of hospitals and doctor surgeries were badly affected by the ransomware. The systems were locked. And again, the criminals were asking for payments in Bitcoin. And we've started trying to track the payments into the criminals' wallets. So this is it was used as a forensic tool to help the police understand the activity that took place and launch a criminal investigation. Next slide, Farlina. And these are just some other examples of that tool being applied to things like DDoS analysis, port scanning behavior, botnet activity, etc. And at least in these three images, hopefully you get the sense that high-level data analytic tools like this, visualization tools, are really powerful. They can massively accelerate your set of analyst capabilities to understand what's going on. So I should say, so BT operates about 15 cyber operation centers globally. 24 hours a day, from West Coast America to Australia, Middle East, Asia, monitoring, observing large-scale networks, the networks we provide. And it's a non-stop task, and the problem is you have a certain number of human analysts in each center with a massive workload. And the question is, how can we use AI and machine learning to accelerate and automate their ability to handle this workload? That's what it's all about. And one of my quests has been to enhance and develop advanced visualization, advanced data analytic techniques to help the human users. I think visualization is underutilized in the cyber domain, and it's incredibly powerful. Next slide, please. Okay. Artificial intelligence, one of my favorite topics. Massively hot topic at the moment. It does go through cycles. It goes through winters and hot periods, and it's gone through the Gartner hype cycle many times, basically. If you go back to the 1950s when it sort of kind of started. It is a key technology. When I say it's a key technology, the fundamental point here is it's a catalytic technology. It's not like development of a new piece of steel or something. It's like the steam engine. It's like the printing press. It's like radio and wireless, or like the silicon chip. It will enable all other technologies, all of the human systems and economic activity. So, and it certainly is having a broad impact on the cybersecurity domain. We're using it for defense. We're using a widespread of machine learning and AI methods to help defend the network. But of course, the bad guys are going to use it for a widespread of different attack vectors, whether it's deep fakes, data manipulation, profiling people, botnet armies, etc. So it's both a defensive and offensive capability. The big challenge, frankly, in this space is people, again, recruitment. So most countries, most states and companies are really struggling to recruit and develop skilled people. I'll come on to this topic when I talk about the Malaysia specifics. Another challenge is communicating the risks of the AI to the stakeholders, policymakers. It's a difficult thing on technology to understand. It's often seen as just a big black box with AI written on it. How do you communicate the essence of it, the threat potential of it, and the value of it to people who are not technologists? This is a major challenge. And it is a technology race between a lot of the major powers are all busily trying to develop this capability for various applications. Next slide, please. So, quick crash course in AI. So, I do recommend going and doing a 3-year degree, but if you haven't got the time, this slide should fix it. What is AI? It's the ability of any machine to display intelligent behavior. What do you mean by intelligent? Something that a human being would normally perform: reasoning, speech, vision, adapting to an environment. And the sort of set of nested bubbles is one interpretation of how to encapsulate it all together. So you've got the outer, the whole field of AI. Within that, you've got the subfield of machine learning. I'll come on to the difference in a second. Then you've got subsets of that: reinforcement learning and deep learning, data science. So the two hot new topics are really the deep learning part, which is basically deep neural networks, large neural networks that since 2009 period have become really powerful, partly because you're bringing them now on graphical processing units, GPUs, that were originally developed for games, and suddenly everyone realized, just a minute, those are really cool for running AI algorithms, these big neural networks. And the whole data science world is maturing, again, the past decade or so. As the hardware has become more available, as data storage has become possible, the bandwidth's increased. So again, it's kind of an ecosystem process that the underlying technology base has evolved to the point where it can support much more complex algorithmic structures on top of it. Next slide, please, Farlina. Future challenges. This is really interesting. So we now have the massive evolution of the whole cryptocurrencies, NFTs, non-fungible tokens, things like that. The Metaverse. The Metaverse is not new. The Metaverse has been around for quite a while as a concept. I do recommend, if you're interested in that kind of thing, go have a look at the cyberpunk novels from the 1980s by William Gibson, Neil Stevenson, things like Neuromancer, Snow Crash, and you'll quickly realize this has been the concept has been around for a long, long time. AI automation, a lot of speculation, it could cause social unrest because it could displace a lot of people. Big arguments about that in the AI community. There's those arguing that will be the case. There's a lot arguing that it actually create more jobs. And if you look at previous historical examples of different factory automation processes in the industrial age, generally over a longer time period, it seemed that the new technologies then led to much more economic development, economic growth, and more employment opportunities. So it depends what time scale you're looking at, I think. Again, the security problem, hackers can now disrupt things like supply processes, supply chains. In America last year, there was a major attack on a fuel pipeline by a cyber attack. Obviously, there's geopolitical issues around future use of cyber, Ukraine. Back in 2014, interesting, there's something called the NotPetya attack, which was basically one state attacking Ukraine using a cyber attack method. And NotPetya was a problem because it didn't just stay confined in Ukraine, it spread globally. Many major enterprises were badly affected by that cyber attack. An area I do care about, I think we'll see more of in the future, is deep fakes and fake news. Large-scale manipulation of information, especially during like election periods when different countries have a major election on. We're going to have to educate the population how to filter out this kind of bad information, and states are going to have to be extremely careful and try and create countermeasures to how you counter a bias signal going into your election process. Another area I care about is autonomous vehicles. So I did a research program about 2 years ago now in the UK, where we're looking at malware spreading from vehicle to vehicle. So imagine in the future, you have much more network-enabled vehicles, computers on wheels. You can have advanced cyber attacks spreading from one vehicle to another. So you drive too close to the vehicle, that vehicle can infect your computer system. Yeah. Now imagine outside my window and from the hotel, there's a giant traffic jam last night. It would have been very easy for a virus to spread from like Bluetooth from one vehicle to another if they hadn't wrong network protocols. This is not really being fully addressed. So there's a whole commercial opportunity in securing autonomous vehicles better, and even not autonomous, just vehicles with more networking and cyber capability. Next slide, please. Conscious of time. Back onto the metaverse topic. One of the research areas we're developing, if you go to the image. So in my research team, we have a researcher called Thiago, who's basically building a virtual cyber operations center. And now in this context, the metaverse and the virtual reality world can give you a huge advantage. So imagine, so I just said, we have like 15 global SOCs from Sydney to San Francisco. If you could actually integrate those all in a common virtual space, then in real time, all the analysts could be working on and sharing common problems. So, and you could see every single screen. So instead of having a physical room with a vast array of computer monitors, you can just have a pair of goggles and then see all the information you need, all the applications you need, and share information dynamically in real time with all of the operators in that same metaverse space. So they're using this advanced VR space for cybersecurity protection. It could be really powerful. It's a research topic we're exploring at the moment. Next slide, please. I'm going to skip that. We're also using it for network engineering purposes as well. Next slide. I'll skip over this. We don't really have time to go into it. So going back to the graph example, one of my other hot research topics is looking at knowledge graphs. So how you construct knowledge graphs using raw data. So we're filtering through like raw text threat reports and text format, extracting all the key actors events, constructing that into a knowledge graph automatically, and using that to build new applications. And again, trying to help threat analysts, people focus on the threat intelligence to understand what's taking place, who are the major actors, what tools are they using, and to automatically extract that, again, from vast amounts of data. Humans just don't have the time to process. Next one, please. Something else I was asked to look at is this. Well, there's often a political or a social risk aversion to the emerging technologies. How do you integrate the right technologies into your commercial domain, into your business domains, into your social structures? Key point, don't boil the ocean. This is a complex actual system. You're not going to solve the whole thing. Pick targeted high-value areas to apply the particular technology stack. Kind of overlooking and thinking about the Malaysian context, same is true everywhere. Cultivate your local talent. Don't just look to bigger foreign enterprises to bring an answer. It's education. Drive your educational process, your education systems to produce the right kind of talent. So in the UK, we have many groups, both government and national entities now, trying to enhance knowledge of cyber threat from the primary school level up, and encouraging secondary school children to think about cybersecurity as a career, especially girls. So there's a big emphasis on helping everyone in the community, every possible young person to think about this as an option. So similarly, building very close joint industry academic innovation. Often academics structures, the universities can be a little bit disjointed from the industry. In this context, we really need close collaboration. We need both sides working together to address these kind of problems. And overlapping with that, it's about people and skills. If you don't have the right people, you don't have the right skill set. Doesn't matter what the threat is, doesn't matter what the particular technologies are that are the focus of the day, you have a problem. So it's people development is the most important thing. Next slide, please. We are coming towards the end, don't worry. Malaysia options, what could Malaysia do? I'm looking at it as an outsider. I have family links to Malaysia now, but I think you could do a lot to look at the data analytics and visualization tools. Cyber defense is an underdeveloped area. Analytic tools for crypto asset management, monitoring, again, underdeveloped. There's opportunities there. Building your cyber training courses. And again, that sounds easy, but it's not so easy. You need state backing, state engagement. You need the right corporations to engage in the process. You need to get the message out into your community at the grassroots level. Because ultimately, like COVID, this is an everyone problem. It's not their problem or his problem or my problem. It's an everyone problem. If my security is bad, you're at risk. It's both global and local at all levels. Develop small teams with more advanced cyber capability and use those as kind of a seed core to bootstrap everything else. Regional partnerships across ASEAN, especially on sharing information. Often it's about knowing what threats are out there, what threats are coming over the horizon. In the UK, we have a specific group called NCSC, National Cybersecurity Centre, which is a relatively new group, been going a few years now. That's proving very successful. That's proving to be a really useful model where it's kind of a semi-independent state-backed body whose focus is to literally help the whole community from individuals, schools, SMEs, companies, public bodies to move forward in the whole cyber journey to enhance everyone's cyber-based capability. And I think they're doing a really good job of that. And then what I'm going to come on to a little bit is design for resilience, not security. Next slide, please. Getting conscious of time. So a couple of slides for questions in the question session. Think about this one. Why do Japanese pagodas not fall down? I won't give you the answer. People can give me some answers in the Q&A session. Next slide, please, Farlina. Creativity is a nice impressionist painting. STEAM means science, technology, engineering, arts, mathematics. Why is creativity important in cybersecurity? Why would I care about painting in cybersecurity? Game for discussion. If you go to the final summary slide. So wrapping up, cybersecurity is not a solvable problem. It will not go away. It doesn't matter how good your encryption is. It doesn't matter how good your firewalls are. It doesn't matter how much you educate everybody. It won't go away. It's perpetual human behavior. Do think about it in terms of complex active systems if you can. If you do go to a lot of industrial cybersecurity events, conferences now, the conversation is about risk. The conversation is always risk management, risk appetite. Understand your system will break, your system will fail. How do you adapt? How do you recover? And what's the risk appetite of a particular institution or organization you're trying to protect? The AI is going to accelerate the challenges, but also provide many tools to help. So overall, it's probably a little bit neutral, but you can't ignore it. It is going to shape the cyber landscape. You need to develop skills and talents in the AI domain specifically for cyber defense. Malaysia options, as I referred to, education services, a regional focus would be useful. Seed core development. The seed core sounds easy. The problem with seed core is you want to build some human capacity that's very deep. So you want highly skilled, a small group of highly skilled people who can enhance everything else. But that takes 20 years to create. It's a long-term project. You can't just say, okay, I want 100 very skilled people tomorrow. That's a 20-year process to develop that kind of capability. Cross-government, obviously, you want to engage your whole defense, security of government channels. That can often be very challenging, as sometimes those channels don't want to talk to each other. And Okay, conscious of time, I think we'll wrap up there and go to the Q&A session. Thank you very much. Oh, there's a book I produced. It's on Amazon if you're interested.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the comprehensive presentation. I think we covered quite a lot of ground, particularly I think the introduction of the complex adaptive systems on how to think of like cyber or in cyberspace and the threats that would actually exist in cyberspace, then heading into some of the examples of technologies such as Bitcoin, even graph-based methods, and also the IoT, and then actually just landing back on AI in the end. I would actually invite the participants to actually share their questions in the Q&A function. This is because I may miss it if it's actually in the chat function. But I do see that we do have one in the chat function. Never mind. So I'll just pass it to you first. This is a question from Abdul Shakir. I think, in your opinion, do you think ASEAN countries should be aware about the threats of their vulnerable cybersecurity? And is there a need to increase their budget on cybersecurity and technologies?
Yes. It's a very good question. And the short answer is yes, definitely. Like COVID, it's no good if you just protect yourself. If your neighbors get infected, you have a problem. Cybersecurity is physically, mathematically exactly the same as a biological virus. It's a public health issue. You've not just got to protect yourself, you've got to help everyone else around you, and everyone help everyone else protect each other. Yeah, it's a collective responsibility. If
it's possible for me to actually also, I guess, elaborate or build on the question, because I think some of the issues that we would actually see today, when if I'm actually understanding the question correctly, is actually about the security throughout the entire supply chain system. And if we're actually looking at the entire supply chain, you're actually looking at different vendors, and perhaps you may get larger players who would actually be able to invest in these type of technologies. And then especially if it's coupled with things like if you actually do have data visualization technologies to see some of the threats, but you would actually also have smaller players who may actually not have the capacity. Some of them may not even be on top of their priorities. To have to focus on the adoption of these technologies. So how would you, in your experience, how would you actually be able to negotiate with these parties to actually to negotiate for them to either adopt or consider, especially if they're going to be a part of the supply chain?
Yeah, it's a good point. I think in the UK, the new NCSC, the National Cybersecurity Centre, is an answer to that. So part of that was about helping small companies, SMEs, adopt the right standards, at least be following basic procedures to have not be a problem in the ecosystem. So to help them meet certain quality assurance standards, international standards, and then that enables the larger players to more easily work with them. But also a big responsibility is placed on the major players to help those smaller companies and to put resource into the collective pool to help develop their talent, at least enhance educational programs at the industrial level. So, as a major player, we take very seriously our responsibility to help the collective, help everybody in this game.
Would it be more of like a sector lead approach, like you would actually have your sectors and then they would actually be
so across health, transport, aerospace, each of the sectors have their own specialty and particular problem set. The NCSC has a sort of cross sector role, of course, as a government body.
I think if I've read it correctly, Britain actually launched their AI strategy last year. So what were the, I suppose, the considerations in coming up with some of the cybersecurity or geostrategic priorities from your perspective when it comes to actually forming this national AI strategy?
I think one of the big concerns for the AI space often is the ethics challenge. So not having biased data. So there can be a lot of problems when you're building data models, whether there's biased data, either gender bias, race bias in the data sets. And that requires education, training, again. Companies take responsibility. So there are various legal frameworks coming into place in Europe, especially on how companies have legal responsibility to ensure that AI is not biased. It's an evolving process. Questions coming in?
Yes, they are. They are, but unfortunately, they're in the chat box. I would actually would like to invite everybody to actually put it in the Q&A, because the problem with the chat function is it actually moves down. So I would worry that I would actually miss
I'll
any
leave it
other
with you to
question.
decide which way you want to go.
Yeah, I do apologize if I actually do miss anyone's question, but we do actually have one here, I think from Jamil Ghani, about the best defense is actually a good offense, and it's about state sanctioned cybersecurity and warfare actually becoming more prevalent. Will this encourage countries with a sizable cybersecurity arm to make use of their offensive ability, since attacks of this nature allows for plausible deniability as opposed to just sit back and maintain a defensive posture? Yes, perhaps some opinion or some views in regards to this. Thank you.
That's true. That's been true for a long time. I don't advocate it. States obviously think about it in those terms. But at the end of the day, I think of it in much more terms of public health. If you go down that road, the problem is you can't contain it. Like the example of the 2014 NotPetya attack, where it's basically an attack between two states, Russia, Ukraine. It didn't stay contained. It didn't stay contained in the target state. It spilled over everywhere. Companies in Denmark, in Ireland, in Norway got affected by that attack. So this is not like traditional kinetic activity. There's a global commons issue when you do things like that, as well as the problem of then accountability can be very difficult.
I think we can explore the angle, or I would like to dig deeper, I think, in regards to the geopolitical angle. But we actually do have a question from Paul Fingal. I think that might be similar to the analogy that you're actually building earlier about, I think, public health. And his question is, I was wondering how far the analogy between biological viruses and complex replicating biological systems in general and cybersecurity and the spread of computer viruses actually goes. Can the same tools and methods be used to study and analyze these and devise solutions to prevent the spread? Yeah, so I think just narrowing it further is about a useful metaphor, or does it extend to deeper levels of study and understanding?
Yeah, so there is a large body of academic work in this field now. So someone called Professor Stephanie Forrest used to be at University in New Mexico in Albuquerque. So she initiated a lot of work back in the 1990s, the original work looking at computer immunology. So specifically saying, well, can we learn from the human immune system? How does it respond to viruses and attacks? Can we copy those principles into computer networks? There's a wide range of research papers that her group have produced, and there's many groups now, and the whole field of computer immunology. To be honest, it's still a little bit of an academic field. So, most of the cybersecurity companies have not directly mapped those techniques into cyber defense capability at the moment. I think they may increasingly need to do so as the problem evolves. But definitely, it's a fascinating area from a research and theoretical perspective.
When it's referring to things as computer immunology, would this be because in my head I'm actually trying to put things two and two together. Would it actually be equivalent to having the ideas of security by design? Because I always hear when it comes to cybersecurity, when we're actually referring to how we should move forward, is it should be equivalent to how you develop a car. The car should always have seatbelts and things like that. So yeah. So is it the same? Is it almost the same?
That's more in the engineering domain. So that's really about good engineering practice, and quite correct. We don't let anyone sell a car without seatbelts anymore, or brakes, or fireproof materials in the vehicle. It's just not acceptable. And yeah, similarly, states should not be allowing any major company to be selling big IT products or IT services that are not have basic security engineering. So admin as a password, ship it in a box should not be happening. 1, 2, 3, 4 should not be happening as passwords as baked in. So that kind of behavior has to stop. And again, so there's a level of response between in terms of regulation states will have to apply on companies.
I think this makes it quite interesting when I suppose the last slide you actually mentioned about autonomous vehicles. So would it be actually the second last or the third last slide? You actually mentioned about autonomous vehicles and actually building then the image comes to mind. What is the seat belt to the autonomous vehicle? And yeah, where is the responsibility? Who would actually bear the responsibility for that?
Vehicles is an interesting problem because you have, a given when you buy a new Mercedes, Jaguar, whatever, it's not one company. It's hundreds of companies that provided parts and services into an integrated system. So each of those systems has to work together, and then there may not necessarily be trust between each of the suppliers of the components, and that's the engine management units and the other electronic units in the system. And then there's the issues around IP. So you don't want to completely share your protocols and algorithms are using with other potentially competing companies, to create that integrated security layer. So that's when regulation is required for states to say, well, actually, if you're going to ship an autonomous vehicle, all parties have to have agreed some kind of common protocol for security or trust that you're going to build into that system. But otherwise, commercial pressures might drive you away from that secure model. Interesting. Seatbelts is an example. I believe Volvo invented it back in the 1960s. And then even though they had the patent on seatbelts, they gave it away. They said, no, this is so important. All cars should have this. We give it away. It's free to everyone. That was good behavior.
Yeah, but that's actually very interesting. Are there actually other examples of situations like that when because I think always when we're looking at cybersecurity issues or standards, it is actually tied to this deep economic problem and the need for and capitalism, I think, to a certain extent. So you're looking at international intellectual property rights and things like that. Would there actually be I suppose other examples of such I guess good practices, and how can we actually further encourage such good practices as we move forward?
Well, it's interesting for me. It's interesting as a philosophical question. If you go back to the history of the internet itself, it started as ARPANET in America. The whole idea of packet networks and a dumb network principle, where you have the intelligence resides at the edges. So anyone can throw packets into that network. The network will just route them around. It's why the internet is so resilient itself. Is a collective commons, is a collective good. So the security problem we face is inherent in it being an open system. So you could obviously argue, well, let's have a closed system that we can lock down. You could do that, but then you lose the benefits of interconnection. So there's a kind of an inherent cost. It's again, go back to COVID. Right now we're still wearing masks in hotels here and in the shopping malls. That will probably change, but why? Because we're trying to protect each other. At the same time, states now need to move to a post-COVID environment where it's risk management. What risk are you prepared to accept? You want your economy to function. All countries are facing this. At the same time, you want to manage the viral risk. So there's a kind of, everyone's trying to do a gradual phased approach to phasing out the COVID protocols. So I think that's a good example of how you want the benefits of an open interacting society. At the same time, you want to manage the threat that from a particular biological threat in this case. And it's pretty much the same in the collective internet commons that exists.
I think that's actually,
you can lock everything up, but you'll lose all the economic value then that you get from the system.
That's right. I think so going, I guess, to the balance, and then actually bringing what you were mentioning about the view towards a common risk. And I think this is actually quite interesting because it was raised by Jamil Ghani earlier about the fact that people, different nations or different parties would actually have different interests. We actually do look at these problems. And then also at the same time, we're actually looking at the future development of technologies that would actually face certain types of, I guess the word that's popularly used is actually bifurcation, but it may actually not actually look at what you're thinking. So we would actually get things like the development of future standards through platforms and geopolitical alliances, like I suppose the Indo-Pacific economic framework, which I think would actually be one of the most recent announcements. I think what would be the projection, I suppose, for a developing state in this situation, And can you actually describe the intersection, I suppose, between privacy, security by design, and even standards development and the future of technological development in general?
There's several questions in one.
Yes, it is.
I mentioned this when I did a presentation last week. Could I have short questions, please? I'll do a long answer. Privacy is an interesting problem. Again, you've got the conflict between personal interest, state interest, or personal. The whole data protection is a major. So in Europe, we have the GDPR regulation about trying to protect individuals, and that's always a fine balance. So medical data in hospitals is a good example of how, when I go to a hospital, I really want them to have the data easily accessible. I don't actually find it useful when I go to the doctor and he says, well, I can't access that data because it belongs to that pharmacy or that thing. And you're going to have to go and give permission to each one of those bodies so that I can look at the data. That's when the technology is not helping. I think that my concern is back to the AI issue. It's how will malicious users use the AI to automate, this whole data harvesting, data processing, malicious use of data grabbing, but using automated bots to achieve that. I think that's my key concern, how that's going to evolve and become a growing threat. And that affects everyone. And that's going to could be a major challenge. It's a problem. So it's how the criminal groups will use the AI to automate their human capability in exactly the way we're trying to use it to defend ourselves.
Yeah, I think thank you so much. I guess that I will probably go to the just kind of rephrase the second part of this question in regards to, I guess, building on the view about, I think, the fact that we would actually be looking at, as you mentioned, criminals actually using AI even to automate certain functions, and this would actually increase the level of instability and threat for users. But I think some of the views when we actually do look at arguments from developing economies would be that the technologies would actually be developed by developed nations, or it would actually be developed outside of the purview of the nations themselves. Would there be what would be the best approach, I suppose, for a country like Malaysia? I think that would actually have certain capabilities, but also at the same time actually is so open to so much vulnerability, I think, and but still actually wanting to be quite friendly with economies and things like that.
Yeah. Well, that's why I try to emphasize the educational point. Because obviously, like operating systems are kind of a global, really limited number of operating systems exist. But at the application level, at the service level, there's nothing stopping you developing your own capabilities, building your own competence in those domains. But fundamentally, you have to start with this, school level cyber education to build the talent you need to create new digital services that suit your economy and that you can then defend, and that you can offer new cyber-enabled services to other regional economies and industries. So it has to become a state priority that's a competence you want to build in your young people.
I think that's it's the most necessary, I think, way to actually build the resilience for the future. We do have sorry.
No, go on, I'll get some questions in.
I do apologize if I just keep on jumping in here. We have a question from Nizam Awang about the current regimes of data protection, because the comment is that the current regimes of data protection, cybersecurity, and data governance is rather fragmented now in Malaysia. In what way can Malaysia learn from UK in this?
We don't have all the answers. We have challenges as well. Especially with Brexit. So there's a bit of a divide between the UK position, say the European position. And in most ways, we try and align with European regulations. But I think it's, again, going back to this thing like the bodies like the NCSC, you need the right state bodies that are neutral ground. You need organizations that are neutral, where individuals, they have a trusted status, both individuals, small companies, big companies, public bodies can turn to to build a common vision, a common framework for what you're trying to achieve. Yeah. So creating neutral, well-funded, organized institutions that are the forum, the convening forums in which all parties can come together for your particular regional, national interest, cyber development interests, is vital. Because otherwise, you will just have this constant fragmentation of major IT companies trying to push one message and government public bodies trying to push another message. It's creating that neutral ground. I think that's one of the things that we tried to achieve, is having neutral space in which all parties can come together and voice their concerns, voice their position on privacy, their position on data, because everyone has a different opinion. You can have many, many different opinions on things like end-to-end encryption. Everyone has a different opinion on that from each perspective. So neutral spaces, create the right institutional neutral spaces in which all parties can engage in a dialogue.
Thank you so much for that. And I think that is actually a very, very good point, considering a lot of it is actually a collaborative effort, and it is actually a multi-stakeholder effort actually moving forward. I would actually want to pick a little your thoughts about, I suppose, the building concepts like digital rights and getting participation from civil society in these type of processes, because I think that would be one aspect of the challenge. Building the neutral spaces is actually one thing. Getting the participation would actually be the second. What would you actually have any insights to share in regards to this?
Yeah, very much so. So some states struggle. It's no good just having your government core security agencies dictate how this is going to evolve, because then you don't have the civil engagement, you don't have the community engagement. So a body like the NCSC was created specifically to be a trusted party. So something that was open, everyone can have a voice into, people can see it's transparent, people can see how it's operating, people can see its constitution, its remit, it's what it's trying to achieve. So building that trust between the community, the civil society, and the industry and the government is what's key. And again, back to COVID, if the population hadn't cooperated with the state, you'd have had a major problem. But in most states, most people cooperate and say, okay, we'll wear the mask, we'll go get the vaccine. This is what's essential for the common good. Some states, there were issues around the vaccine. And in the UK, some people are still not taking the vaccine because there's a lack of trust. There's been a breakdown of trust through various media channels. They've come to a belief that they can't trust it, which of course is nonsense. But it maps perfectly well into the cyber domain. So whatever the messages around the privacy regulations you want to put in place, or the particular digital service controls you want to have in place, you need that common dialogue across all parts of society. It's very easy to shortcut that. It's very easy for stakeholders and policymakers saying, no, this just going to take too long. We won't bother. You trust me. You need in this domain. You need to bother. Seatbelts was different. You can just say, okay, it is a law. Everyone wear a seatbelt. Yeah. In the UK now, it's against the law to use your phone in the car. I noticed in Malaysia, everyone uses your phone in the car. In the UK, don't use your phone in the car. You will get heavily fined. Okay, the policeman will talk to you. So for safety, the government's just said, no, people are crashing when they use a phone in the car. You just stop it. Cyber's not like that. Cyber's not a domain in which you can apply such easy black and white binary regulatory processes. Right. Do we have any more interesting questions? No one's answered the Japanese pagoda one yet. I mean,
I will. We will tackle that in the end. We will make sure that we will get a response. I think we do actually have two more questions, and it actually concerns technological adoption. So we have one from Ming Yin Ho about what do you think how quantum computing will have an impact on cybersecurity? Yeah, and I think the second one is on Malaysian ports, but I'll read the second one later. Yeah.
Oh, good question. I like quantum computing. So that's my first degree in physics. There is a lot of hype about quantum computing and cyber. So the message is that quantum computers, when they happen, will be able to break all encryption codes. This is not true. A, they're not likely to happen for quite some time, probably a decade or more. Two, when they do happen, they won't break all encryption. Some encryption is at risk. And three, the time it's going to take them to arrive means that there are many government organizations globally working on post-quantum safe crypto. So it's not that difficult to create new algorithms that are safe against quantum computer attacks. So I don't worry about it as a major cyber threat just yet. It's an interesting technology. It has many other technology applications. So for example, you can use a quantum computer to accelerate AI. You can use, what's very interesting is to use quantum computing to accelerate machine learning algorithms. That would be fascinating. That's beginning to happen. People are exploring that. And that could have lots of very general, broad technology industrial applications and have a huge economic benefit. So there's no reason why Malaysia can't be playing in that space, begin to develop capability. But I don't see it as a major cyber threat just yet.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I think that's actually a great insight. So I heard about the encryption and quantum computing. I think it's always touted as the new.
Usually, it's by people selling quantum computers.
Okay. I have actually bought into the stink oil. I must be mindful of that. The second question is actually from Nurul Atika, and she is actually asking if you have some thoughts on Malaysian ports technology about the importance for Malaysia to have AI in their daily port services and how cyber security will help the ports in maintaining their secrecy.
By ports, you mean shipping ports,
I believe it's actually, it will be shipping ports.
So interesting problem. So the port problem is you have vast numbers of containers going in and out, and that's the thing you're trying to secure. It is a data problem. No reason why. So AI should be a way of accelerating your ability to filter and observe those data flows, the flows of the containers themselves, at all kinds of different levels. So whether it's having an AI-based imaging system in the ports, observing containers and doing automatic image classification, or AI monitoring the data flows associated with the containers, right down to the IoT level. So having your AI monitoring the AI mesh or network of devices that may be linked into the port infrastructure, which is increasingly the case with tracking of containers and shipping containers. So yes, it should be of help, and something as an ocean state is worth developing.
I think there's the second question from Abdul Shakir actually builds on that about the AI technologies and how it can actually help ASEAN solve or preserve, or at least I think assist in some of the border-related maritime problems. Because I think Abdul Shakir actually asked if it is, I think just read it out. Do you think AI technologies can help ASEAN solve or at least preserve its maritime border-related problems? Because it's very, very crucial to solve these critical problems. So how do we securitize or actually place enough data points in
that's probably out of the scope of the presentation, really. As I said at the beginning, AI is a catalytic technology. It can help across all sectors. It just accelerates your ability to process data and accelerate what human beings can do with particular systems. So it can help in most domains like that.
I think that would actually be the end of the Q&A that we would actually have gotten. I did actually have a question about the pagoda, only because I am not familiar with the architecture of the pagoda. Would you be able to elaborate a little more on that?
Yeah, so I gave that example because so the trick is why did the pagodas not fall down? Because some of the pagodas have been stood for centuries, 500 years, 600 years in Japan in an earthquake zone. So the major earthquakes over 600 years have been substantial. They should have knocked down any structure that was built from that period. But the pagodas don't fall down because they're resilient, they're flexible. So the pagoda core is a wooden column, the height of the pagoda, and then the floor, the structure is loosely coupled to that central column. It's not hard pinned to it. So when an earthquake happens, the whole thing shakes, and it's like a giant sponge. It absorbs the shock. Yeah. And so resilience is a function of having loosely coupled systems. So in the digital domain, it means don't tightly couple everything together. As a human obsession with efficiency and optimization, you want to try and minimize costs and tie everything together and just cram everything together to reduce costs, right? For cybersecurity, don't do that. Resilience means loosely coupling your systems, okay? Keep space, allow flexibility, allow maneuverability between the systems. Another example I gave last week was aircraft. Most large aircraft flying, how are the aircraft stuck together? They're not welded, which is the cheapest, quickest thing to do. They're riveted, which is very time consuming for the aircraft manufacturer. There are millions and millions of metal rivets that rivet the plates of the aircraft wings together and the body together. Why? It's a very time consuming process for building because it's resilient. Those rivets mean the whole wing plates can move and flex as the aircraft's in flight, changing and maneuvering, going up to different temperature ranges. It makes it resilient. Yeah. Same thing in the cyber domain. Think about how to architect and couple your networks and digital services together so that they are resilient, not optimal. Optimization is catastrophic at the end of the day. Yeah. So, and going back to the digital human immune system, the computational immunology, what you see when you look at, say, an animal's immune system is not optimal. It's not an optimal system, but it is a resilient system. It's designed to have multiple layers of defense, starting at your skin, your muscle structure, your bone structure, down into the immune, the immune cells being produced in the bone marrow. It's a highly resilient system. Yeah, that's what you should be architecting your digital services around if you want best security.
Thank you so much. We actually have a response for that from Yosha Naidu. I actually just noticed about Japanese pagoda made of wood, which can absorb shock during earthquake.
Well
and they
done.
Don't use this. Yes, somebody actually answered the pagoda
Excellent.
question.
Excellent.
Yeah. I think, but just to state an observation, and I guess to ask a question in regards to that. So if we actually, about optimization versus resilience, and I suppose budgetary cycles. So how does that actually match up? Because I think somehow it's like I suppose the model of optimization is that you actually you invest or you purchase these systems, and then that it's actually the end of the situation. So you don't build the process. You actually, as you mentioned, you would actually just get the technologies and actually just assume the next cycle. Yeah.
So back to the complex cyber systems piece of feedback. So you need a continuous feedback loop of when you've created the system, architected it, implementing it, you then got to go around and measure it and assess it, update it. It's a feedback loop that doesn't stop. You can never say we are now secure. You can never say finished, right? It's a continuous sense react cycle about observation, measurements, modification of the architecture. There is no end game to this process. Which is why it's a great career if you're think of a young person looking for a career.
We should tell that the Ministry of Education is like, it's a great career. It's
great career.
Yes, forward looking. Yes, I think we've actually arrived at the end. We actually only do have 2 minutes more. So I would actually just like to pass the floor over to you for any last minute sentiments or anything like that.
But basically, it's Malaysia is a great country. You're rapidly developing state. You have great opportunities. I think you could take a leadership role in the region. You could really assume a cyber leadership role for this region, and build your talent base and become the go-to center for digital security. No reason why you can't achieve that.
That is actually quite an optimistic note, and actually a great point to drive forward. Because this is actually the fundamentals or the things that we are concerned about today, and it is actually mentioned a lifelong situation that you're looking at, because you're actually looking at building greater resiliency. I think that we would come to an end, I suppose, of this session. Thank you so much, Dr. Hercock, for sharing your thoughts. Yes, and for the and I appreciate the questions from our participants. They're all engaging, and thank you so much for bringing your thoughts to this session.
No problem. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye, folks.
Bye.